that's something Jesus was uniquely good at, was balancing truth and love. Like, you think of the Samaritan woman at the well, and he like really clearly told her that the way she was living was wrong. But man alive, he loved her. That was so clear. I guess that's something I'd like to have a lot more of. I'd like to emulate Jesus in that way. Just learning how to balance the truth and love. And yeah, and like you say, if I have to take some abuse to get to a point where someone's willing to just drop some barriers and let's come on, bro, let's have a chat.
Well, hello and welcome back to this week's episode of About Abortion. To all those who've liked and shared and commented and reviewed, thank you so much. To those who haven't, where have you been? It literally is so easy. It takes no time, costs you nothing, but it can really help us to get this message out there. So please do just do that for us. Be ever so grateful so that more people can hear the truth about abortion. Well, we're joined once again by Dave Payne. Dave, thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
It's really good of you to offer yourself once again. How did you find the last session? You were a guinea pig. You knew that. How was that for you?
I enjoyed it. It was very informative, very useful. It was very clear.
Good. Well, for those who didn't catch that, you can go back obviously and catch that last episode. And really the idea of these 3 or 4 sessions is we are walking through some of the basic pro-life apologetics, the training that enables us to start and carry out effective, positive, constructive conversations about abortion with members of the public who more often than not will not, agree with us to begin with. But the idea is that we can help them to question their own assumptions, think it afresh. And the reason I believe in this training is I've seen it change many minds. So the idea of this little series is just to help people access the training in a bit of a fresh way, a sort of real-time tutorial, as it were. And so for those joining for the first time, the idea is that you can kind of follow this lesson along, as it were, and you can kind of answer the questions in your own head and see what you think of what Dave and I are saying, and really do treat this as a sort of training session. And then increasingly we're going to be talking about where and when you can apply this stuff. But the short answer to that is absolutely anywhere. This works in any context. These are really helpful principles and tools for having a positive conversation about abortion. Now, Dave, you mentioned that last week was a bit like laying the foundations, because you're a builder, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So what did you mean by that? What was last week? Just for anyone who didn't catch last week, little recap, what were we looking at there?
So we looked at how we see this issue in our own minds, how we think about this before we go out. Not necessarily the techniques we'd use to, not the things we tell to other people, but how we see this issue and how it looks in our mind. And what I meant by the foundations was that you don't start to put a roof down and build a house underneath, or you don't chuck some walls on first. The first thing you do is you get a good solid grounding for a house. And you start from the bottom up, and that's what that was for us. That was
Brilliant. And to that end, anyone who didn't catch last week, do just go back and get that, because that is really the grounding in the basic case for life, really. Why we're pro-life, and we looked at how it's really a simple issue. Morally, it's simple. If the unborn are human, then how can abortion ever be justified? It really does come down to the humanity of the unborn child. It's not about situations. It's not about any of these functions, oh, but they can't reason yet. Oh, but they're not out of the womb. All of these are just details. The fundamental reality is, if they're human beings, shouldn't they get human rights? So we looked at the basic case for life last week, the sort of brain work, as it were, getting it right and straight internally before we go out to convince others. Today, a bit more sort of internal work. We're looking at the heart, really, our own hearts in particular, and we're looking at our attitudes. And then next week, we're going to look at, as it were, the mouth. How do we then speak? How can we convey that in an artful way? Because I think the attitude and the sort of where our heart is at is really important in terms of how that conversation is going to go. So before we dive into that, just want to get us thinking about our role here, what our job is. Okay, so in being voices for the voiceless, which we know we're called to be, that's why we're here, that's why I guess most people are listening in. Most people listening in will feel that conviction, but maybe not know how to go about that in the most fruitful way. So I wanted you to take just 10 seconds and jot down, and you can do this at home if you're listening, or just think about this in your head. What do you think makes a good ambassador? Okay, so we want to be ambassadors for the unborn child. What do you think makes a good ambassador? Okay, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Just scribble down anything you like. Anyone listening at home, go ahead. Think what makes an ambassador a good one. Or if you're struggling with that, try and think of it in this way. What makes a teacher a good teacher? Because part of what we're doing actually is trying to teach, educate, get people to think differently. What makes a teacher a good teacher? Okay, what have you got for us, Dave? What makes an ambassador a good ambassador, do you think?
Knowing who or what you're an ambassador for.
Great.
So, understanding.
Great. Great. So as an ambassador, we're not here to represent ourselves. We're here to represent the unborn child who cannot speak for themselves. And that's key, knowing who you're representing. Any other characteristics, you think?
Clear communication.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah. And anything else?
I haven't got anything else.
No, fine. No. So that's good. I think what I was thinking of was certainly clarity. So that's kind of what we're going to come on to, I think, next week in terms of how do we communicate in an artful way? How can we make sure we're understood? You know, it's one thing to have knowledge, to know the right answer, as it were, but it's quite another to communicate that in a helpful way, in a kind of wise way. I think it's been said that the difference between knowledge and wisdom is knowledge is knowing that a tomato is technically a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. So wisdom,
I like that.
Yeah. So wisdom is different from knowledge, and I think many people say that with. I mean, what did you say for teachers? Did you get any? Was it a similar sort of thing for? Yeah. I think with teaching, you know, speaking with others I've learned alongside, it's one thing for the teacher to have all the knowledge. They generally do, but are they clear? Can they actually explain that in the way that you can follow? And so again, it's that wisdom of how to communicate clearly. So we've got knowledge. We looked at that last week, really. So knowing the case, knowing the scientific facts, the logical arguments, the philosophical arguments. We're going to be talking about the wisdom of how to communicate clearly, winsomely, helpfully. But sort of between those two things, what I want to focus on today is really character, the heart issues. So when it comes to a good teacher, have you ever had an experience of a teacher who was, you know, they knew their stuff and perhaps they were quite clear, but you didn't get the sense they were really that interested in you? They weren't for you. Yeah. They didn't go that extra mile.
Yeah, I've absolutely had that experience.
But then have you had any of the sort of the opposite end of the spectrum? Have you had any great teachers?
I've had some, not many, not okay. Maybe not great.
Yeah.
I've had I have had some good teachers.
And have you had any that really sort of, you really felt they deeply cared about you and doing well and go the extra mile?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that can make quite a difference.
Yeah, being passionate about the subject and your pupils. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I want to focus on today. It's one thing to know the right stuff, it's another to have the skills. But ultimately, and there's a quote here from Martin Luther King that goes along the lines of this: whom you would change, you must first love, and they must know that you love them. You know, at the end of the day, we don't want to win the argument, but lose the person.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of what we want to focus on today. We want to put the person that we're speaking to before the debate.
So it's more of a reform than gaining the moral high ground.
Right, exactly. You know, I find quite a helpful way to imagine it is, you know, with an issue like abortion, which can feel very controversial, quite combative, it can feel a bit like it's me against you.
It's a fight. Yeah.
It's a fight. But actually, if we can reorientate that, so it's me alongside you together looking at this issue, and I'm helping you to think about it maybe in a different way, that can really take some of the venom out of the kind of atmosphere. And so really we want to think, how can we do that? And some of that comes down to the sort of tools we're going to be introducing next week. But a lot of it actually starts again inside us. We need to get our own attitude straight, okay? Because I think it's fair to say that emotions can be running high. on this issue.
Yes.
Have you experienced that?
Absolutely, I have. Yes.
Can you give us one or two examples? So on the streets, for example, or where have you kind of found people to maybe get a bit emotive on this?
Yeah, it's quite
issue?
chaotic. It's quite confusing. It's a bit like a pack of wild, hungry dogs feeding on a lifeless corpse.
Yeah. There was that one time, actually, I remember I was on the other side of the street, but I saw you surrounded by about 20, teenagers,
bright,
students maybe.
bright colour hair.
Yeah. And they're all just
tearing us apart.
Speaking at once.
There's no logic to it per se. If you were to answer one of their questions rationally and present a clear argument, they wouldn't accept that and be like, okay, we've made some ground there as such. They would just throw something totally different.
Right.
Throw a curveball at you and like you don't have a womb or something.
Right.
Entitled to speak to me.
Yeah.
Or something. Yeah.
But what's really interesting there is, had you been out there advertising pancakes, right, and someone just didn't want a pancake, they wouldn't crowd around you and hurl abuse at you. They'd just ignore you.
They wouldn't be cross you. Yeah.
And yet there's something about this issue that just attracts all this emotion and sometimes anger in particular. It just is. It is one of those issues, isn't it? And I think, we talked a bit about this last week. But for those who didn't catch us, just briefly, why do you think that is? Why is it so emotive for people?
Because it's human life. Because it's life, and it's an issue of taking life. And the stakes are incredibly high, aren't they? This is serious stuff.
Yeah, which in itself, I think, bursts the bubble of those who want to really just normalise it and say, look, it's just healthcare. It's not a big deal. It's just a straightforward procedure. Well, if that's the case, why do people hit the roof sometimes? Just when you mention it,
Yeah.
So it is an emotive subject. And if we're going to be helpful to the people we're trying to reach, we need to be able to remove as much of that as possible.
Okay.
We need to cool it down. We need to slow things down. And we need to help people to understand, and this is truth, this is not a kind of an act. They need to understand the reality that we're not against them. We've got no antagonism toward them. No, that's not what this is about. And there are certain ways we can assure them of that, but it starts with what's going on inside. So first of all, I want us to think through a little bit about our own hearts, okay, and our own thinking about the people we're going to engage with, okay? So look, if anyone's listening into this podcast, it's more than likely that they already care very much about the unborn children. Okay? That's why we're here.
Yes.
Right? Many of us. And so it's quite natural that we can actually get worked up, if we're honest.
Sure.
Have you ever sort of felt that temptation?
Absolutely. I think somebody picked on my little brother at school.
Right.
Yeah, there's a great desire to thump him on the nose.
Right.
And nobody likes a bully, do they?
Yeah.
If you're sticking up for somebody who's the underdog or being picked on because they're small and weak.
And that's quite natural, it's natural if the sort of lion cub sort of dynamic, that protective instinct can kick in, and
you justify anger.
Right,
you can justify.
And in a sense, we don't want to say that's always wrong. It's right that we should feel angry against an injustice, but it's absolutely wrong and very unhelpful if we can't control that.
Absolutely.
And make that subject to our wisdom and what it is we're looking to actually achieve, because it's no good to just meet anger with anger.
No.
It doesn't get us anywhere.
No.
So I think we need to be honest that we do care about this issue a lot, rightly, and we're angry against the injustice, rightly, but we mustn't let that dictate the way we behave, because that's not going to be helpful. And I think it can be easy to imagine the person we're talking to is the enemy. If we're honest, sometimes if they're attacking us, our instinct is going to be, that's the enemy.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the things that we can actually remind ourselves about with regard to the people we're actually speaking to, even those who are adamantly promoting abortion?
That we've got a lot in common with those people.
Right.
That they're no better or worse than us. We actually share a lot in common.
Yeah.
The devil's the enemy, I suppose.
Right.
The evil one. He is the common enemy. He's their enemy as well.
Right.
He hates them.
Yeah.
He'd deceive them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a couple of really big things there. So, Scripture says, was it Ephesians 6? Our fight is not against flesh and blood. Right? It's not against human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can often look like that when the other day I think you were next to my wife actually on the display. I think it was you and two little girls.
Yeah, it was.
I say little girls. My wife and Gwil's wife, they are both, compared to you, they are quite small. So it was you and these two ladies surrounded by a mob, and it's very easy to think of that as a sort of us versus them
exactly, yeah,
dynamic. And of course, we just know, spiritually speaking, that's not the case.
No.
Yeah, we have actually one common enemy, because our fight is against these principalities, spiritual forces. So I think that's key. Remembering who the real enemy is. It's actually life-changing when we really take that seriously. When we're not looking at the person, as it were, but looking behind them at the real enemy. So that's key. What else have we got in common?
We're all fallen. We're all sinners.
Right. Yeah. So we're not morally superior.
No.
There's that old saying, isn't it, that there go I, but for the grace of God, that would be me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are still plenty of areas where my thinking is still woefully wrong.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah, there will be
blind spots. Whatever else. So we're common in our fallenness. We have the same true enemy. We're also both made in the image of God. And obviously we put a great deal of emphasis on the unborn child being made in the image of God, because the unborn are so neglected. But it's equally as true.
So, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
Of their mothers, their fathers, and even those who are, directly attacking them. So I think doing this kind of inner work's quite important. And so certainly prayer is a very helpful way to remind ourselves of these truths and to try to see things as they really are. Paul says, doesn't he, we no longer regard anyone from a worldly point of view. We once considered Christ that way, but now we actually see things from a spiritual point of view. And that's key, because if you go out there without that preparation and someone comes at you and you speak back in kind, well, that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, no progress will ever be made.
That's right. Great. So that's some of what we need to, I think, do with ourselves, as it were, how we see ourselves and them.
Just one more point, maybe, from not so much a spiritual point of view, but we share a society with those people.
Right.
We're under the same laws. We're under the same healthcare system.
Right.
It would probably be a general opinion that we want it to be good. We want to be protected. Right. We want to have good services there. This wants to be a kind, productive, good society.
Right.
We want to.
That's helpful. Yeah. So working for the common good.
It's working for the common good.
Yeah.
Well put. Yeah. Exactly.
No, that's a good point. And again, even just helping people in a conversation to see these common ground. We'll come on to that more next week, but finding the common ground is absolutely essential.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
But again, I think that starts with the way we are seeing things. We need to remind ourselves of certain truths, combat certain falsehoods. But no, that's good. Yeah, working for a common good. Thank you. So that's a bit about sort of what we need to remind ourselves about, us and the spiritual reality. But also we need to remember something about them, I think it's very easy if someone comes against you to be defensive and to forget that actually they're a person with a sea of needs and they're broken. Yeah, they're sinful, just like me, but they're also broken. And often I think it's easy to forget that even those who come across very, they talk about people being either, sort of rhinos or hedgehogs, don't they?
Right, yeah.
So some in a threatened situation just kind of curl up in a ball and sort of want to, hide, but others go on the offensive and they charge. But actually, fundamentally, they're both feeling threatened. I think it can be easy to forget that actually, although they might come across very bold, actually, what's going on in their heart? What's the...
Is it a front as such?
Yeah, exactly. So, I think it's important to remember that there are... people have these kind of... A friend of mine described it as filters of painful experience through which they interpret things. It can be very easy to forget that. People are not computers. They're human beings with all these sorts of pasts and issues and fears, and you never know. Yeah, right. You never know.
No.
I mean, have you come across that yet? Would you say on the streets? Have you observed it kind of? I mean, has anyone ever kind of raised an issue where you think, oh, right, that explains where they're coming from? Or...
I think I've had snippets of it.
Yeah.
Maybe not enough experience to sort of completely say that's what it is.
Yeah.
There's certainly some things that have indicated problems elsewhere.
Yeah. I had an experience just recently. We had someone come out to our display, and first time she came out very angry, you know, had a go at all of us, stormed off. She came back again the next time, a month later, and again, you know, having a go, very offensive, you know, and again, didn't want to talk reasonably at all. Came back a third time, and to cut a long story short, I won't go into the details of how we got there, perhaps next session we can, but I felt like I managed to break through a bit, and we actually had more of a heart-to-heart. And she actually shared quite a lot of what had gone on in her life. And all of a sudden, I could understand a bit more of where she was coming from and why there was all this anger, actually. So, you know, disappointments in, you know, her own personal life, but also in the way that certain systems have been working around her, feeling quite sort of marginalized, disappointed, frustrated.
Yeah.
And that, of course, that none of that would justify, you know, the taking of an innocent life, but it does help you to understand the person, and maybe, you know, it can help to generate some compassion and
see how they're possibly backed into a corner where they saw they had no other way out.
Right. And once again, there, but for the grace of God, go I.
100%.
You know?
Yeah, sure.
So I think remembering that these people themselves have needs, and we love them. They're not our enemy, but even if they were, we love our enemies, right?
Yes.
So all of this stuff I think is important, just for kind of preparing our hearts and getting ourselves sort of positioned right. Okay. A couple of quotes that might be helpful. People don't care how much you know. Okay, so that's last week, isn't it? We looked at all knowledge, the science, whatever. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Another one is this. People may not remember what you say to them, but they will remember how you made them feel.
God, that's quite profound.
So what do you make of those two? Do you think that's right? Do you relate to those looking back? So
yeah, it's going back to the teachers. You asked me about good and bad experience with teachers. Definitely teachers that cared about their subject and about me would have been better teachers. Yeah, the teachers that cared the most about the subject, I mean, were the best teachers I've ever had.
Yeah.
And yeah, I can remember how people made me feel.
Yeah.
Nearly always.
Yeah.
It's quite a common association. If I think back to a person or a situation, how I feel is
And it's true, I can't remember the words that were spoken to me on many occasions, but I can remember how it felt. You know, what was kind of coming across. And we've had some interesting experiences on the streets. You know, I remember talking with some teenagers, for example. They were probably 17, 18. Long discussion about abortion, one of our public education displays. And this young chap, he was very pro-abortion, and he didn't change a terrific amount during that conversation. But at the end, he did shake my hand and he said, you know, that's the best and most positive conversation I've ever had about abortion. Thank you. And off he went. Now, I don't remember anything else he said in that conversation. I doubt that he remembered anything I said in that conversation. But
you remember the terms under which you passed.
That's right. And I think that goes a long way, because again, it's instead of me versus him, it's actually together looking at this issue. You know, what do you make of this?
Slight journey together.
That's right.
And you can make some changes together. Yeah.
That's right. And so I think although it's quite contrary to the way I think, I'm quite sort of logical, rational person. To me, it's all about the arguments and so on. But the truth is, we've got to remember they're people that we're working with. Because I know for me personally, when someone's challenged me on something quite big, quite fundamental, quite personal, it's made all the difference to know that they are saying that with my best interests at heart.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I know. I see what you're saying.
They've really sort of, it makes it easier to hear that.
When you know that person really cares about you and has your best interests.
Not just having a go.
Sure. Not just trying to get one over you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of that, you know, comes down to the way we come across. But again, we've got to get our own thinking straight. So just a few scriptures to kind of corroborate with this. We've got you know, Romans 12:18, as far as it's possible, you know, live at peace with everyone. You know, as far as, you know, we can't necessarily just stop people getting cross with us sometimes, but as far as possible, you know. Also 1 Peter 3:15, you know, it talks about being ready to give an answer to those who who ask you for the reason of the hope you have. Right?
Hope within you, yeah.
Do you remember the next bit?
No.
We'll always do this with gentleness and respect.
Right, I couldn't have.
Yeah, so gentleness and respect, I think it's, again, we don't want to get into the whole, I've got all the answers, I'm going to win the argument, but lose the person. Gentleness and respect, so key. Another one comes to mind, 1 Timothy 2, verse 2, live quiet and peaceful lives. So we want
mind
to
your own business. Is that the one?
Well, kind of, yeah. One translation might say mind your own business.
Oh, right, yeah.
The translation I've got, quiet and peaceful lives, and it's about honouring the authority and not being a generally kind of rebellious, sort of antagonistic presence.
Right.
But actually living at peace as far as is possible. But of course, the as far as possible is key.
Yeah,
because we can't control other people's responses. But I want to kind of look at another side to this, because on the one hand we want to do all that we can to assure people of our love for them, and that comes through seeing it straight in terms of they're not the true enemy and so on and so forth. But let's just think for a bit about how Jesus was received. How do you think that kind of feeds in? Did Jesus manage to please everyone? And do you think everyone experienced Jesus?
He was initially celebrated, welcomed as a hero. Quite a lot of people turned on him quite quickly. There was a lot of jealousy around him. The religious leaders of the time were very jealous. They ended up trying him under false grounds, and they sought to usurp. Is that the word?
Yeah.
So come and take his. They hated him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also mindful that he came to meet a very broken people, and he came and loved us. He didn't come and sort of with harshness, and he came with love. He laid down his own life to save us. And he came to a broken people, which there's a link there to what we're talking about, isn't there? We want to love these people, and
yeah. I think it's important to make the distinction between being loving and being liked. Because Jesus was, without question, the most loving person who ever lived. And yet he still experienced that antagonism. The Pharisees and others really hated him, even though all he ever did was true and gracious and right. Even when there was the woman caught in the act of adultery, and all he said was, whoever's without sin cast the first stone.
Yes,
that would have been experienced as such humiliation for these self-righteous Pharisees. And so I think it's important to note that whilst we need to do all we can to be as loving as possible, Jesus said a student's not above his teacher. So if he was hated by the world, then we can expect to be hated by the world, And I think I don't know what you think about this, but I think a lot of Christians in the church today think that if we ever get any kind of persecution or hatred or whatever, we must have done something wrong. And so we need to change the message and make sure we're, never offending anyone. I mean, have you come across that?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's my own personal belief, though. No, we're considered as sheep for the slaughter.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we're reconciled to that. I think coming into this work, if you're going to go out into the streets, there's a lot we can do, and it makes a real difference. It really does. When you have your thinking straight and your heart attitudes are right before God, and we're going to go on and look at the artful way to conduct these conversations, they make a real difference. I've really seen people's guards go down, seen them think in a different way about abortion. But I think we've got to be reconciled to the fact that some people...
There's going to be some fiery darts.
Yeah.
I suppose if you're not grounded prior to that, you go out expecting nice conversations and we're going to get some happy reform, and you're not expecting any hostility. When you are stung with some, it could be then much easier to sort of turn and lash back rather than continue to conduct yourself in a loving and gentle way, which is the ideal, I guess.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jesus certainly confronted his opponents, but then it seems to me often then walked away, left it, and he carried on investing in the disciples, those who were listening and learning. So I think it's just an important detail, because if we fool ourselves into thinking, right, I'm just going to learn all these tricks and every conversation is going to be plain sailing, we're going to be disappointed. But also, it's not a sign that we're doing it wrong just because someone's getting angry. We might be doing it all right, but because of what's going on internally for them, because of the stakes being so high, as you say, I think it's to be expected that some will still experience it, or they'll respond in such a way as to accuse us of being unkind, even if our conduct is impeccable. Yeah. I think this was before you came on board, actually, but last year in our public education display, we had an interesting conversation with a certain police officer who was trying to argue that because someone took offence at what we were doing, it was therefore equivalent to us being violent. It was as if we had actually been an aggressor.
Right.
Because someone's experience of it was, they said, they found it offensive. And of course, we've got to distinguish between those two things. What we're doing at our end.
Yes, and how it's received. Yeah, sure. And there's a bitter sting to conviction, isn't there?
Yeah.
It's never nice being told what you've done is wrong or something's wrong. And as you said, 1 in 3 women will have had an abortion by the time they're 40. There's going to be a certain percentage of the people we talk to will have experienced this themselves. The stakes are high. The emotional, this is emotional stuff.
And as it's been said with regard to evangelism, what's ultimately being rejected is not you, but actually it's the gospel. And certainly the work we do. I mean, one example I can think of is where we were just showing the pictures on the streets, and someone came on and said, "So what you're saying is," and they're railing against what we're apparently saying, but we hadn't said a word. It was just the reality. It was just the picture of, in fact, just a living baby in the womb. Just that reality was enough to convict and bring out all sorts of responses. And I thought that was a great example of how actually that wasn't us causing offence. That was the truth.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I wanted to close with just a scripture from 1 Peter chapter 2, which I think kind of encapsulates this. Was there anything else you wanted to share? Any other?
No, that's very much on the money, and that's something I do remember when I first jumped on board with you. There was something we had to sign to say that we're not out to incite violence. We're not out to, and I just remember thinking how well put this is on the money. Like, I'm here because I want to do some good, and I don't hate anybody. I don't wish anybody any ill. I want people to stop doing things that are harmful, dangerous, bad. And how do we go about doing that? So this is super practical, on the ground stuff. I want to love these guys as well as possible. I want to show them that Jesus loved them more than they'll ever know. And there is an option to make a change. We face choices every day. We make some good, we make some bad. But I want to convey as like, Jesus loved me so much. He gave everything for me. And if I can do that for people, it's 100% what I want to do.
Amen. Yeah, and it's so important, isn't it? The way we treat people is just paramount. And I can think of all the great social reformers. You know, the non-violent resistance. When it comes to that point of resistance, the fact that it was non-violent, the fact that it was experienced as love, was ever so important. Let me just close with this verse here. So this is in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12. Live such good lives among the pagans that, though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits us. And what I love about that verse is you got this tension, this kind of paradox almost going on. They accuse you of doing wrong, because they experience that kind of conviction or whatever. They accuse you of doing wrong, and yet at the same time, they know deep down what you're doing is good. And that's what we experience on the streets. Sometimes from the very same person. They'll accuse us of doing wrong, and yet they're sticking around and still talking because they appreciate the way they're being treated.
Yes.
And there's something in them that wants to know the truth as well. So I think we've got to be prepared for that tension and kind of work with that, and sometimes I feel a bit like out there, I'm a bit like a punch bag, just let this person punch, and then when they got out of the system, we can have a good conversation.
Finally have a chat. That's something Jesus was uniquely good at, was balancing truth and love. Like, you think of the Samaritan woman at the well, and he really clearly told her the way she was living was wrong. But man alive, he loved her, and that was so clear. I guess that's something I'd like to have a lot more of. I'd like to emulate Jesus in that way, just learning how to balance the truth and love. And yeah, and like you say, if I have to take some abuse to get to a point where someone's willing to just drop some barriers and let's come on, bro, let's have a chat.
It's a privilege.
Yeah, I love you, and
it's a privilege. You know, we've seen that happen again and again. Well, thanks so much, Dave. Next session, we might have a bit of time to actually see a bit of you in action, because I don't know if you realise, but when I put the GoPro camera on you on the streets, we've captured some footage.
Cool.
So we can do a bit of analysis.
I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, you look forward to that?
Yeah, definitely.
I hope our listeners are looking forward to that. We'll bust a bit of that and just do a bit of a kind of, you know, what went well here, what can we do differently, you know. Be quite interesting to listen back. I don't know if you've ever done that.
Never done it. There'll be a lot of scope for improvement.
It'll be very interesting. No, you're doing a great job. So brilliant. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to everyone listening at home. And do stick with us as we next week we're going to go on to really looking at how we can take this knowledge and this right attitude and apply it in a wise, artful, winsome, effective way, and start and carry out really constructive conversations about abortion.